So recently I sat down with Gloria Maniga, a Kenyan writer who is now based in the US, in our first episode of Portraits, a show where we bring you different personalities where they tell us about their life journeys. Enjoy this one. Gloria, welcome to the first episode of Portraits. This is a show where we talk to various individuals and ask about their lives and what drives what they do. So the first question I'm going to ask you is, could you tell us about your early influences in your life that shaped your interest in writing?
So I would say I was very lucky to have a very literary childhood. I grew up in a house with both my parents were language teachers. And so we always had books in the house, books, poetry books and books about, novels and plays, etc. So my siblings and I grew up reading a lot. Yes. And also my dad happened to be a writer. So he used to write books in Kiswahili. And I would watch him read and write with such zeal and enthusiasm. So that also must have contributed. The primary school I went to also had, so we had a huge and very wonderful library. And apart from that, we also had something called the interclass drama competitions. At the end of every term, each class would be tasked with writing and producing and acting out their own play. And then they'd pick winners, etc. But I know I really enjoyed the process of just trying to come up with an idea and then finding actresses and actors and trying to make your play as captivating and as interesting as possible. So all those things must have fed into me becoming a creative, even though at the time I was not conscious of it. I never thought I'd become a writer.
And you've said something about various writers, upcoming writers, dropping manuscripts at your house.
I recall some Swahili writers coming to my house to talk to Dad about their manuscripts, and would look through, they would discuss them, they would have extensive discussions. Yeah, so they'd just come, bring the manuscript, my dad would look at them, and then they would sit and critique, and I would just curiously sit at a corner and try to listen in.
And still about writing, what inspires your stories and characters? And are there particular experiences or aspects of the Kenyan culture that play a very significant role in your work?
Well, I would say that first I follow my curiosities. If I'm curious or intrigued by a subject, then I challenge myself to write about it. So that, of course, in wanting to write about it, I'll have to go and research about it. So my curiosities, I follow those a lot. The other thing is I'm very interested in people's lives, because what I write, I like to sort of consider or call myself a realist writer, because I am interested in writing about real things that happen. So I'm always observing, I'm always trying to figure out people, their motives and motivations. So yes, that's how I decide what to write on. In terms of experiences or aspects of Kenyan culture that play a significant role in my work, I would say yes, there are a very big number of things that I find very, very interesting. Yeah, land customs, how we do religion here, death rituals, marriage customs, and also just folklore. So this past weekend, I visited the African Heritage House in Mlolongo. And this is a place that was sort of started by Alan Donovan and the former Vice President Murumbi. Yes, so they will sort of collect art from different parts of Africa and just sort of put it together. I think Donovan also wrote a couple of books about it. Yeah, this place stirred in me something very interesting. And I find myself now very interested in sort of fictionalizing Kenya's past and trying to figure out how Kenyans lived, not during the colonial period, but way, way before that. So I hope to write a couple of stories or books, maybe, about how Kenyans lived before. But I'm also very interested in seeing what other Kenyans are writing in terms of books, like something between Chintu, Jennifer Makumbi's Chintu, and Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. Just how I feel like we don't have books about how Kenyans lived before the colonial period, and I'm very interested in that sort of thing. So those are some of the things I'm currently very fascinated about.
And about your writing process, Could you describe your writing process? And do you follow a specific routine or have a particular ritual that you do when you're writing?
Rachel, I'd love to answer this question by saying that I begin my day by, drinking a very cold Coca-Cola and writing awesome nonfiction like Joan Didion, but I don't. So I can't say that I have a particular routine. What I do know is that I sort of try to write every day, and I move from one piece of work to another. So I could start by revising a piece of nonfiction, and then I'll move to a piece of fiction, then maybe an essay. So I sort of move in between. So I could work on something for an hour, then move to another genre for an hour, take a break, and then get back to the first genre. Yeah, but I try to write every day. And I also read a lot as I'm writing. So that would be as far as routine goes for me.
Could you tell us about this reading thing, reading and writing, the correlation between them?
For me, that would be, I love to read as I write because it helps me to I'm able to see what other writers are doing, how other writers are able to tackle things, they should I say, the manner and style in which they introduce things into their work. Yeah, so I try to study that, and then I sit back and ask myself, so how would I tackle this if I was, say, Toni Morrison, or if I was, Arundhati Roy, how would I tackle this? So I read so that I can get different things from different writers, and maybe see how someone writes about the environment, see how someone else writes about maybe illness or something, and then just trying to figure out how would I as a writer approach this. So yeah, I'm always in conversation with other writers as of right now.
Still on your writing process, how does your approach change depending on the audience that you write for? Because you've written, I think, very serious business-related topics, and then you've also done children's books. So how does this change?
So I write for different audiences. I write young adult fiction, I write for kids, I write short stories, but I also write things like business textbooks and business articles for corporates. So because all these types of writings demand different things from me, I sort of have to, should I say, switch gears as I write for each of these audiences. So what I do is, again, I read and immerse myself into the kind of writing that I'm trying to do. If I'm writing a children's book, then I'll go and try read lots and lots and lots of children's books and just sort of surround myself with this kind of literature, listen to audios and videos, and just try to put myself in that mental space. If I'm writing for corporates, then I'm going to sort of read business articles and reports, etc. So yeah, I sort of try to create an environment or put myself into a space that will allow me to will allow the creative juices to flow depending with the kind of writing I'm doing.
Perfect. There are some challenges you faced as a Kenyan writer, and how have you overcome them?
Challenges are, yeah, of course, I've faced some challenges in the process of trying to become a writer in this country. And the major one would be that I came of age as a writer at a time when Kwani was folding. And so the literary scene in Kenya at the time was not very robust. And yeah, so I would have loved to be to begin my writing at a time when we had all these events and reading events and mentors here and there. But that is not what happened. So basically there was some, should I say, a very dry spell after Kwani, during which one didn't know who to approach as a mentor. And yeah, so just trying to create a community was not easy at the time, but I'm glad things are changing. Now we have things like Macondo Festival. I've seen groups like the Writers Guild and another group called Kwani, but with a Q. So I feel like writers are finding innovative ways of gathering and creating their own little pockets of communities. And yeah, so I believe things are getting better. Another challenge, like I've said, is the issue of mentorship. Writing is a very personal and a very engaging thing. So to look for someone, to get someone and tell them, okay, I want you to mentor me through this, can be a bit of a challenge because people have different styles, but also just you need to Writers need to immerse themselves in their work all the time. So I wish it was easier. There seems to be, it's very difficult to get someone like as a mentor to just work with you, one person as a mentor. Like I've said, people have created little communities of their
Yeah.
own, and now there's social media. So people create WhatsApp groups and maybe Facebook groups, and you can connect with people on Twitter. So it's getting easier to connect with other writers from across the world, not just Kenya. So yes.
Let's talk about this story. I think you love the story so much, and some of us also love it at different levels. Boy, so what was the inspiration behind this story?
Boy is a very interesting story because it's the first Boy's story. Like the story behind Boy is very interesting because Boy is the first story I ever wrote. And I wrote it because I was working as a teacher in Baringo at the time. And one of my colleagues, so I saw a newspaper article about the South Land Defense Force regrouping. And then I took it to the staff room and showed a colleague of mine. I was like, hey, have you seen this news article? And she told me that she'd actually witnessed it. So she was born in Mount Elgon. And by the time the land war was happening, she was there. And then she made a comment and said that this war is the one that killed my mother. After she experienced it, she never ever got over it. She never really healed. So that, of course, piqued my interest. And I decided to go and sort of just try and research and read more about it. Now, as I read and researched about the Sabaot Land Defense War, I realized that the information that I found online, news clips and newspaper articles, they all seemed to be, should I say, they had whitewashed the story so that all the young men in Mount Elgon region seemed like bad guys. It had a very good guy, bad guy trope. So those guys that were in Mount Elgon, the young men, etc., they seemed like very bad people. And then the Kenya Army came and rescued. They came and rescued the people, and the women were thanking them on the videos and saying, "Oh, they came, and since they came, we've experienced peace in the region." But then, from the story my friend had told me, people were very traumatized. So much more happened. It was not as black and white as the newspaper articles were sort of showing. So I just found myself a bit, should I say, irritated by the whitewashing, and I challenged myself to go and write and sort of try and write this story exactly as I'd had it, including the nuances. Instead of just making it about good and bad guys, I decided that I was going to write about the experiences that people went through, the cruelties that people passed, but also just the trauma that the community passed through at the time. So the land injustices, the way the women were raped, and yeah, all those different things. So that's how I challenged myself, and that's why I wrote this story.
There's a choice you made that is very interesting because I think most stories are written from a third person, omniscient narrator perspective. Why did you choose the first person point of view in this story? And how do you think it influences our experience of it?
So that's a very interesting question. I wrote it in first person because my aim was to center a young female narrator. I wanted to center her. Like I mentioned, the stories that I found online seemed to sort of focus on different people. But I wanted to center a young female protagonist because that was in honor of my friend who told me the story. And I also wanted to I used first person because I wanted to give a very intimate portrayal of the narrator's thoughts and emotions. So I felt like first person was a vehicle through which I could sort of very accurately or effectively communicate the feelings and emotions of this narrator. Yeah, so first person helped me to deliver the emotions very well.
The story has this kind of, when you read it, very delicate, but there's an emotional toll, as you've said. Did it affect you in any way when you were writing the story? Because it must have involved a lot of, as you've said, research, and some of the experiences that you had narrated were gruesome and everything. Did it affect you in a certain way because of what happened in that story? or the backstory?
Of course, it was very emotional because I remember one of the things I did was I went to look at reports. Those are sort of truth, justice, and reconciliation report that was written. And I also just talking to my friend and having her tell me about how the army guys would take the young men up on sort of aircrafts and then throw them down. And then in the morning, mothers had to wake up and go to the mountains to try and find dollops of their dead sons. That was horrifying. And it was very emotionally distressing, especially also because my friend had gone through this. So as I wrote the story, I would meet her for tea and talk about it. So it was very, I think like it was almost as though I was experiencing this with her because I'd had to ask her questions, but also watch videos. So it was a very 3D experience. You're watching videos, you're speaking to someone who was on the ground, you're reading these things, you're hearing about how the mothers or the parents of these people reacted. So it was very emotionally exhausting. And after writing that story, I think I had to take a break for a while because I was very, very emotionally exhausted. But I also, in terms of as a reader, I'm somebody who resonates with very emotional stories. I like to read a story that sort of, I sort of connect with stories that have emotions. So I wanted to, much as it was hard, I wanted to really put in the emotions and try to sort of show exactly how it was for the families. And yeah, yes, it was a difficult write, that one.
Now, you've in some forums you have called this story the gift that keeps on giving. How has this story changed your life or opened doors for you?
Boy, so like I said, Boy was the first story I wrote. So after I wrote it, it was shortlisted for the Writivism Prize, which is a Ugandan literary prize. And so I was invited to go as a speaker and an attendee of the workshop. So of course I was excited. That's the first workshop I ever attended. And that was exciting. But also, apart from that, I sort of, because of the same story, I got invited to a different workshop on Bulago Island a few months later. And I got to meet writers and we kept in touch and they've been sort of reading through my work and trying to guide me through it. So yeah, that's the first thing about Boy. It opened other doors and it made me sort of, should I say, consider myself a serious writer at the time. Yeah, and also just it was translated into Yoruba a few years ago by Praxis Magazine. And I just thought that was nice because someone was going to read Boy in a different language. A couple of years ago, Boy won the ECA, an Africa Land Policy Short Story Prize. And sort of because the Africa Land Policy focuses on issues about land, so they decided to do sort of a creative call out to try and discuss land issues through stories. And so, yeah, I was happy that it's one of the stories that sort of got published in an anthology that they did. So, yeah, just as I said, the more people read, the more conversations that can be had about land, the better. So, I'm glad that happened.
You've mentioned that you taught for around 8 years.
Yes,
I think.
8 years.
So about teaching, you're a high school teacher for 8 years.
Mhm.
How was the experience for you and what made you leave all that behind?
So I taught high school for about 8 years, and my experience can be described as both exciting and challenging. Exciting because as a teacher, one of the things that happens is that you're able to sort of work with learners or students and sort of help them you help shape their minds, but you also get to learn a lot from their brilliance and their perspectives and how they look at life. So that made teaching very exciting. It was also challenging because a teacher doesn't just deal with the intellectual part of a student. You also have to deal with their emotions. So it's a whole like 360 degrees kind of thing because you have to talk to them about their dreams, their ambitions, on top of just teaching. So I felt like that was challenging and it demands that you bring your best foot forward every day because you're sort of dealing with a holistic human being and you have to help them not develop just intellectually, but in all the ways that a human being is supposed to develop. So I left teaching in 2020. I quit teaching to write full time. And that's because at the time I felt like I'd given everything that I could give to the teaching profession, but also I'd also been planning to leave and sort of become a full-time writer. I wanted to sort of dedicate myself to writing, see how much work I can produce, what else I can do. So in 2020, I left teaching and now I write full-time. So I can consider myself a full-time writer.
And when you left teaching, that's at the time you were leaving teaching, something also happened that propelled you into the decision. You could tell us more about it.
I've been thinking of switching sort of careers to full-time writing in around 2018, 2019. So when I won the Miles Moreland Writing Scholarship, that sort of it afforded me a whole year. So the Miles Moreland Scholarship gave me funds to sort of take a year off teaching and just focus on writing. So with that, I was able to sort of make the shift which I'd been wanting to make for a while.
Is there something you miss about teaching?
Yeah, I miss my students. I miss sort of just being in a sort of a place with teenagers, because for teenagers, a lot of times they are not like, adults, we've become as an adult, you've experienced life, you've seen the disappointments, etc. But a teenager is open, they can dream. There seems to be, they don't have boxes, their lives are not yet boxed in. So I feel like I miss that, should I call it shameless ambition that comes with being a young person. Just, yeah, the way you can dream and dream and dream. So being around kids helps you sort of also dream like that. So I miss that about teaching.
While you are still a teacher, you are writing, and I think you're doing book reviews and everything else. You could tell us about that?
Yeah, so by the time I went into teaching, I had already figured out that I was very interested in writing as well. So what I did is, over the weekends and during my free times, I started writing articles and sending them to The Nation. So I consistently wrote book reviews and sort of literary criticism and just different sort of articles and sent them to The Nation. And then they started publishing them consistently. And yeah, I just challenged myself to write more because I realized that by writing, even in my free time, I was growing this muscle that I really wanted to grow, which is like, I wanted to become a good writer. In my last year of university, a friend who worked for a local publisher told me that they were looking for people to write children's books. And because at the time I used to write a lot of poems in my free time, I decided to give it a try. So I wrote a number of children's books that were published, 3 children's books that were published by Moran in 2011, 2012. And then by the time I was moving to Baringo to teach in 2012, 2013, I sort of had realized that I have an interest in article writing. So I started writing articles and sending them to The Nation, and they started publishing my articles. And then, yeah, in time I grew, I would go to festivals in Uganda or here in Nairobi to just sort of interview writers. I got to interview interesting people like Jennifer Makumbi and also to review their books. So I grew that muscle and I just kept trying to do book reviews and interview writers. So in a way, I sort of became a literary journalist. And I wrote for The Nation up until 2021. Yeah.
And now that you're doing all this while you're a teacher of geography and
business.
Business.
Studies, yeah.
Okay, so now that you're doing all this while you're a teacher of geography and business studies, did you ever feel like this is something that only a teacher of English should do, or it is just because it was a passion and you wanted to do it no matter what?
I never thought that writing is something that is meant for English teachers, because even in uni, I remember when I was registering for my education courses, I was torn between picking English literature and business. At the time, I'd been watching some business programs and I was like, oh, this boardroom creativity and sort of trying to come up with ideas looks very fascinating. But I remember I struggled a bit with whether I should study English or business studies. And so when I got into school as a teacher, I didn't really mind. I would work on some projects with the English department, help out with the journalism club, etc. And yeah, I never thought that it's off, because I feel like a passion is a passion and you pursue it nonetheless. Yeah.
Now, about teaching of literature, many Kenyan writers have faulted teachers of English for teaching set books in a very mechanical way. We talk about themes, characters, and we bring all these, we take these all these elements apart. And they've always faulted that we teach in literature in a very mechanical way that is not the way they intended their works to be digested or something, or consumed. Do you think there is a problem with how literature is taught in Kenyan schools? And if yes, how can this be improved?
That's an interesting question because just a few weeks ago, a publisher used another story of mine in a school textbook. And the interesting thing is they used the story when I was away, so I never got to read the book. But then when I came back, I looked at the book. And the shocking thing is that this publisher had changed the story completely. So a character who had died in my story had been resurrected and then taken to hospital. And I was very shocked. Like, it is supposed to be my story, but I had to read it to the end to know what happened. And I'm yet to have a conversation with this publisher, but I know when I speak to them, they're going to tell me that the ministry regulators are not comfortable with kids dealing with things like death in stories, which is interesting because to me, I feel like that's absolutely ridiculous because death is something that happens. Children across the world, and now more than ever, are sort of have to face death on a day-to-day basis. So instead of telling people that they shouldn't write about death, what the regulators in the ministry should be doing is telling us that, look, we want you to write books about grief. We want you to write stories about grief. And also in the stories, give children tools with which they can handle things like this. But what does the sort of Kenyan ministry regulator do? They decide to change a story so that a character doesn't die. And in that way, I feel like you're sort of teaching or presenting to children a utopia that doesn't exist. Yeah, so, okay, I say that to say that, yes, I feel like there's a big problem with the way literature is taught in schools in Kenya, because it seems like there seems to be an ideological straitjacket that literature teachers are forced to sort of, should I say, to wear or something, are forced into, so that you teach students literature with an aim of them passing the exam, instead of teaching it in such a way to make them enjoy literature, to make them sort of just open up their minds and experience these different worlds. Yeah, so there's an old movie that I really like. It's called Dead Poet Society. And it's by the main actor is Robin Williams, and he acts as a school teacher who goes to this very strict school, a very elite, high-end strict school, to try and teach those children poetry. And what he does on his first day of class is tell them to sort of rip out the first page of the introduction to the poetry book because it has a formulaic way of discussing literature. And he goes ahead and through weeks and weeks of teaching them, teaches the students to sort of reach deep within their soul, understand literature, and understand poetry in a way that sort of speaks to their soul. And in the end, you can see that he changes these children so much. So I feel like our own literature teachers in Kenya also need to do this thing that Robin Williams does. They need to sort of just find a way to teach children to read literature in a way that touches their hearts and souls, and not just for exam's sake. Like I would say the past few months, we've had an interesting 2 months, the last 2 months in Kenya, because of the whole conversations we've been having around finance bill and mandamano. And I've seen a lot of people come forward to sort of quote literature books and quote, characters from different literature books. So it looks like for the first time in Kenya, literature has become alive and it is being used, not in the exam room, but in day-to-day conversations. And I feel like we need more of that. We need people to connect with literature in outside classrooms, in everyday societal conversations. So yeah, I feel like there's a lot that can be done to just make literature more interesting and sort of make it more relevant outside class and not just in class for exam purposes.
There's an issue that teachers of English or teachers of literature struggle with. I think not only in Kenya but everywhere else. Can you really teach children to love reading? Is it something you can teach, or is it something that is modeled at home? Because you find that for some students, they're reading the set book as their first proper book, and the way we teach it is going to be full of this classroom situation that is so tense, so they don't really enjoy it. Is there something that can be done? And the first question is reading something you can teach someone, or is it something that the environment just makes sure that you can start loving it through exposure?
That's a very interesting question, because I found myself asking the same question when I went to Baringo and I was teaching. So I decided to volunteer my time in a primary school to teach kids how to enjoy literature. And one of the things I realized that some of the students I was teaching or in my reading club had not read a lot of books before. And so I think the thing is, I believe that you cannot teach someone to love reading, but you can expose them to as many books as possible. And then if it's someone who likes sciences, they'll probably sort of lean towards the science fiction or that kind of writing. If there's someone who likes arts, they'll lean towards something else. So I feel like the thing is to expose children to as much material as possible, and then they'll just find their own ways. So you can't say, okay, let me go and teach a kid how to like reading, but expose them to enough books. Those who like different things will just gravitate towards the things that they like. And in that way, it will even help them sort of, specialize early, because they'll discover what they like and sort of focus on it.
So, are there any Kenyan or international writers who have influenced your writing style or literary voice?
Yeah, of course. There are tons of writers across the world who've helped water and weed the garden of my creativity. And I feel like I admire and learn different things from different writers. Yeah, there's Uganda's Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi, who, through her writing, teaches me how to bend and fold the English language into Englishes that actually portray how our speaking mannerisms in East Africa. So I find the things that she does with English to be very, very exciting. Yeah, there's Aisha Haruna Atta from Ghana, who I just think does fantastic things with women's histories, like in her book, $100 of Salaga. Yes, I also admire Anthony Doe, who wrote All the Light We Cannot See, because I find from him, I learn the power of attention to detail and little things like sounds and sights and such things. And finally, I would say Toni Morrison, because her language is just astonishing. There are many, many more, but those are the ones that come to mind.
Wow. Let's talk about technology, the impact of technology on writing. How do you think technology and social media have impacted the literary world in Kenya? And have these changes affected your writing or how you connect with readers?
Technology, I can't say for sure that technology has changed my writing, but I know that what it has done is that it has made it easier for sort of writers to share their work with readers, and most times they get immediate feedback on their work. So yeah, you're able to share your work with many, many more people. And even if your story is published and shared on like X, then many, many people get to read or interact with it immediately. And some of them are going to DM you. So you're going to get feedback almost immediately. Yes. But is this useful to a writer? I don't know. The jury's still out there. I'm not sure if getting sort of immediate reactions is a good thing for your creativity.
Let's talk about AI, because artificial intelligence is all the rave at the moment. What do you think will be its long-term impact on the art of writing as we have come to know it?
AI. What I know for sure is that I don't think AI is going to replace me as a creative. So I'm not worried about that, because that's a conversation you're having a lot these days. And also, there's this sort of notion that AI is faster and that it's gonna sort of, in the long run, it's going to be cheaper for corporates because, the time, the time is, so it's faster. So they're going to use less time than, maybe if you're writing a novel with AI, you're going to use less time than if somebody's sitting. But then as a writer, I feel like there's something to be said about the whole process, the slowness of the process, the whole, the whole concept of you sitting down and creating a first draft and then a second draft and then a third draft and then just trying to sort of clean it up, improve it as you go by. So I feel like AI might be the thing right now. It might be okay, but you still need writers to sort of sit in their space and do their work. Because even if you're going to sort of create with AI, you need to feed some information, which will be used, sort of AI is going to use it to sort of replicate or create something new. So where are you going to get this information that you're going to feed into it? So I feel like I'm all for, yes, AI is good and things might change. Creativity as we know it might change, but there's going to be room for both. I don't think it's going to sort of completely take away creative jobs and etc.
They say that AI will not replace you, but someone who uses AI can replace you. What do you think about writing in that way? So a writer who knows how to use AI could replace a writer who doesn't. What do you think?
I think there has to be some creative input. There has to be some information put in. You understand? If maybe you're trying to write a Stephen King novel AI style, you have to feed or you have to use Stephen King books that exist, which he wrote over time, which he worked on for years and years, for you to be able to sort of simulate this kind of thing with AI.
Yeah.
So I still feel like there's something to be said about the whole process. So maybe we'll have to find a way for these two things to work together. But I just don't think, it doesn't make sense to me that AI is going to completely replace or take the jobs of writers, etc.
Let's talk about literary trends. How do you perceive the current trends in Kenyan literature? Are there any emerging voices or themes that you find particularly exciting?
Well, I would say that I imagine that being a writer in Kenya right now has completely changed. In the past, should I say in the past few days or in the past few weeks? Because I feel like, so there's an old interview that Yvonne Adhiambo did, and she said that she described Kenya as a Pollyanna country, a country where everything seems perfect and beautiful until it isn't. But I feel like maybe we used to hold back and just sit back and be quiet about things. But in the past few months, the conversation or everything seems to have changed because writers who maybe just heard about things in passing or from history have witnessed something that has never happened before. I'm very interested, as a writer, I'm very interested to see the kind of conversations and the kind of art and the kind of questions that are going to emerge from the new sort of reality that you're witnessing right now, where sort of where we no longer come across as a Pollyanna country, but we've seen that everything is not fine. And so, yeah, there are a lot of emerging writers or people who are writing now that I find very, very exciting. One example is the writer Kiprop Kintai, who's working on a book about Donholm. So I've read some stories from his collection, and he seems to try and capture social anxieties of the lower middle class people, their dreams and ambitions. Yeah, he also examines loneliness and sort of just the anxieties of living in a city, just the way Cyprian Ekwensi and Major Mwangi did in the past. So yes, there are many more writers as well. There's scholar Akinyi, who's done a book called Hope Skip Jump, which I'm told is a very ambitious book and I can't wait to read it. There's Linda Musita, who's written a book called Mtama Road, a collection of stories. yeah, there's Kabubu Mutua, there's Alvin Katembe. So yeah, there are a lot of interesting writers who are sort of consistently producing good quality work. And I'm excited to sort of get to read them and to see what they're up to.
This leads me to the next question about social change and literature. What role does literature play in the Kenyan society today? And how can it contribute to social change?
I feel like not just today, but since independence, literature has always sort of helped us understand our past, try to make sense of our present, and sort of try to predict what our future is going to look like. And the early crops of writers like, I would say, Grace Ogot and maybe Okot Pibitek use their pens to preserve our history. And then the next crop, the likes of Binyavanga, the likes of Yvonne War, also examined our politics, our political space, and sort of our attempts at nationhood and sort of being a nation, etc. And I feel like the modern writer has an interesting place because now we find ourselves in a space where we have to examine our present, but not just the present, but how our past as a country, how our decisions, and how our sort of our attitudes towards politics, etc., is affecting the present reality we are in now. I've seen a lot of young people on social media now trying to do civic education, teaching people about this and that. And the one thing that has come that has sort of been clearly discussed is how much regret there is. They're like, oh, we never used to think politics is going to affect us. We never used to think the past is going to affect us. But here we are finding ourselves in a place where it looks like we've gone back to, like, should I say, Moi's regime or something. So it seems as though we are finally realizing that the past is not just history, but it is absolutely affecting our present, and it is likely to affect our future unless we sit down, have conversations, and try to figure out a way to sort of move forward without sort of ignoring the past. So it's interesting. I can't wait to see the kind of conversations, literatures, and poetry and plays that are going to come out of this very interesting period in time.
About your works, among your works, do you have any personal favorites? If so, what makes it so special to you?
Personal favorite. I like all my work. It's like, someone said, it's like asking someone to choose between their children. Doesn't make sense. But I would say there's a story I wrote in 2017. It's called Child's Play. It was published by the Johannesburg Review of Books. I sort of would refer to it as one of my favorites because I got my agent signed me up on the strength of that story. So she read it and then sent me a message, and yeah, that's how she decided to represent me. So in that way, I would say I have a special look. I consider it one of my favorites. Yeah.
Can you share with us any details of upcoming projects, what you're working on right now, and what readers can expect from you in the near future?
Currently, I'm pursuing an MFA in creative writing at the University of Memphis in Tennessee. And I'm working on multiple projects, one of which is a short story collection, but the other one is sort of the novel version of Child's Play, which I just mentioned. So, yeah, that's what I'm working on right now. And I also have a story forthcoming in, I think, the fall issue of the Georgia Review of Books. It's called Hina is Just Roots, and I can't wait for you all to read it.
Someone out there, a young person out there, is considering writing as a career. What advice would you give them from your journey and everything else that you've gone through as a writer?
My advice would be that writing, like running, is not a short-term thing. It's not a quick thing. So it takes time for your writing to grow. It takes time for you to become good at it. It takes time for even you to start selling your writing and getting published. So what you need is patience, a lot of patience. My agent likes to say that this is the slowest industry in the world, and I believe her, because it takes ages and ages before you get feedback, before your story is accepted. And even if you get a publishing deal, it's going to take a very long time before your book comes out. So yeah, you need a lot of patience, and also you need to just keep growing, keep the faith, keep reading, keep writing, and just have a lot of patience, because it's going to work, but it will take some time.
Thank you very much, Gloria, for passing by and taking time to, spend this time with us and answer our questions. We wish you all the best in your endeavors, future endeavors, and everything you do.
Thank you. This was fun. Thank you for the conversation.